Hi everyone, and welcome to Memory Matters for All Ages. I'm Janelle Nichols of the Gables of Hudson Assisted Living Residence. We welcome back to our program Catherine Kilpatrick, speech-language pathologist with over 40 years of experience, author, speaker. And Kathy, we have a lot to talk about today, so we're going to jump right in. Welcome back, by the way.
Thank you.
All right, earlier shows, we have talked about changes in memory beyond normal aging and those with mild cognitive impairment. Now, sometimes that will move into a diagnosis of Alzheimer's disease, and sometimes it will remain the same.
Or sometimes even get better.
Or get better, so I am right about that. Okay, all right.
And often it's eating better. I have some people that I'm working with who, if they're on a better diet, if they're sleeping better and getting some exercise and staying hydrated, or perhaps they need to be treated for a thyroid problem or whatever, then over a period of time, they seem to be brighter.
All right.
They seem to benefit more from the props.
So there are reversible memory challenges.
There's over 100 causes of memory loss that are reversible. You're so right.
So just because someone's having trouble doesn't mean, oh my goodness, I have Alzheimer's disease. They can be reversible. But when you work with clients, are there patterns that you look for that help you know where that person is, if it is normal aging, if it is mild cognitive impairment, if you need to talk to the family about further concerns? Are there some typical patterns that you look at?
Well, every single one's different.
Sure.
And I think one of the things that happens very often is it seems normal to the person that they're living with because the changes are subtle. It's like you come in from out of town and see that your grandchild has grown and changed, but the people close by may not notice those changes as much. And the question is, oh, they're not feeling well, or maybe, you know, there's something going on in their life. They're doing familiar things, but what else might be going on? So it's a lot of observation, and I think that's the part, because I've done it, like you've said, for 4 decades, oh my gosh, you know, that you get a sense and then you kind of investigate it a little bit more. One of the things that is a subtle change that people often don't identify as an issue, and it may not be, but it seems like they start avoiding complex tasks. And that's more executive functioning, it's the thinking. So it's like, oh, mom's not doing the checkbook, you know, balancing, but she still pays the bills and she does fine. Or, you know, she used to cook these elaborate meals, now we seem to go out to eat more. Or she doesn't want to have Thanksgiving at our house, you know, she wants to have it somewhere else. So what also can happen is increased anxiety. I mean, think about it, when you go to do something that's really complicated, I mean, you can have a little anxiety. I mean, I think that's normal, it keeps you kind of on track.
Right.
But sometimes the only thing you see is some increased anxiety overall, because everything, whether it's the driving or the shopping or creating something, can be an issue. Traveling to familiar places, they may kind of bring their circle in of where they are traveling to. And then again, that's just subtle. But it's like, well, you know, she's getting a little bit older, but it could also be that the traffic on the highway is going too fast, there's too much going on. I mean, that's not a bad thing to self-regulate, but sometimes I see people way later on where it's very obvious, and there are, as we've talked about, as a speech-language pathologist, there's a lot of tips I can give to families, and a lot of stuff that I refer to them on the website and the blogs and articles I've written. And then sometimes it's just the personality change. They may become more withdrawn, or they may have more anger, lashing out a little bit because that underlying frustration, the depression, but most often I hear that it's like they just kind of sit there like a bump on a log and watch TV, and it's as if their start button is broken. So these are little things, not that you necessarily run off and get a geriatric assessment and go see the neurologist, but pay attention, and if the pattern persists, it would be a good idea to get an assessment. And I always love when I get people at this earlier stage, because there's so much education that can be done rather than the doom and gloom, and then also things to kind of get them back on track a little bit. And that part to me is very exciting and hopeful, but I don't one of the reasons we're doing this show is to hope that people will speak up to their physician or have a family discussion sooner rather than when you're in crisis another year or so down the road.
Well, now families, the issue of families. You and I both work with a lot of different families with a lot of different dynamics. Yes. And I would think that, do you find that some families are more aware that something needs to be addressed and some families are more in denial? I mean, that's a challenge.
It is.
Yeah.
And I like to think that the denial is, in some cases, definitely, and I've seen that personally, where people don't want to admit it because if we say grandpa has Alzheimer's disease, you know, then I might have it too, because there's so much misinformation and misconception about that. But I think a lot of it is they don't really understand what they're seeing. So they're jumping the gun and they don't want to look at it because it can't possibly be that. And then if the education process, I love it when I work with them and they start to understand a little better, then in retrospect they go, oh, you know, I noticed this a couple of years ago, but I didn't realize what it meant.
Okay, all right. Well, let's get to the nitty-gritty. Can you give us some specific tips for someone or for a family member who is noticing some things with involving mild cognitive impairment?
Okay, great. And so first of all, the telephone. You know, and families will tend to maybe introduce, for safety purposes, which is not a bad idea, a portable phone. Or say they don't need a lifeline because they've got a cell phone. And so what happens is if the portable phone is new and you no longer have to pick it up to get the dial tone or whatever, or finding it where they left it because they're not used to that pattern. So I totally assess that type of thing. And it's great to have a cell phone, but excuse me, is your cell phone always with you? And if you had a medical emergency, perhaps you could not speak, and therefore we need to look at some other types of things. Medications, some people just have a few, but I have seen some where the list has been 2 pages long, and if they're handling them out of the pill bottles and starting to have some of these difficulties, did I take it, did I not take it? I had one woman who kept all of her old pill bottles and just kind of had them set off to the side with some medications left. All kinds of complications with that. I like when someone's having mild difficulties to get them into a pill reminder box early on so that they know how to use it, because new learning, if a person starts to progress in the disease, is going to be harder for them. And then it may be that they need DocuDose, that type of thing where it's already set up. Sometimes it needs to just be taken out of their control completely. And we did a whole show on the medication things. So I will make references in the blog so people can get more information on that. The calendar, it's so interesting because when I go in and do home health and, well, the appointments are up on the calendar. Well, the calendar is across the room. The person's weak or they have visual difficulties. They can't see it. So I'm often getting a desk calendar for them. So there's also some information to be able, a place that you can put down some additional information, because it's not functional if it's on the wall. And sometimes I'll do a weekly planner, or we're going to talk about a memory board. And let me see if I can do this. I usually do a dry erase board, and let's say the television is there, the person's favorite seat is here. I will make sure that it's in a place where they can see it often. Doesn't help if it's on the dining room table. And large print, and I find out what works for them, and simplification. So putting the date and then the appointments that are going on, and sometimes they'll ask a question over and over again, when am I going up to Cleveland? And so I put a line and put that down below. Families tend to need a lot of guidance in setting this up because they'll tend to crowd it with other things or use colors that don't pop on it or make the print small. So, but this is so, so helpful. I had one gentleman one time, we did that, and he reported being confused often. And when I came in one time, he says, you this was great. Now I know what's going on. And his wife said, thank you, because he would ask me 1,000,000 times a day. One, it is not meant that they memorize this. It's more when they ask the question for the 10th time that day, what day is it, or what time, are we having lunch, that you cue them. And there are strategies called spaced retrieval, which speech pathologists use as part of this program, so that they eventually say, we better eat because it's almost noon, because they start looking at this on a regular basis. So this can be particularly helpful. I will also create like a communication list. They're trying to think of their favorite restaurant and they can't, so you list all the restaurants. And then they can point to it because it's in there. How many times has it been on the tip of your tongue and you can't think, oh, let's go to that place to eat. Well, it's down by there. It could be family members' names. And again, I'm just giving you a brief overview of things to put on your radar screen. The cooking, it may be that you have to write down the recipes in a more simpler format. They may still be safe at the stove, but they're not making the recipes that they used to. Shopping, creating the list, and then paying the bills. It may be, like one woman said the other day, my family's taken it over, but I still know stuff. And I said, so you need to be part of that process, and maybe you write out the checks and put them in the envelope, which I've done with some people, because you don't want to give up the car keys and you don't want to give up paying the bills, and then everybody looks it over and then you can send it. So it's a dignity issue, it's a quality of life. If we start taking away too much, then as one patient of mine said the other day, he says, I feel useless.
So you're looking at individual also, and as you talked about, it's dignity.
Yeah, everyone is so different, and I loved having a couple of sessions with someone because then we tweak it. So I had a couple that I was working with, and then they hired someone in to kind of come. And so now with our smartphones, they took a picture of the way it should look, so they can replicate it each day, because they were putting too much information down, and then the person stops looking at it.
Right. Well, I'm going to have you give us something for our week here in a moment, but I do want to point out that a lot of people don't realize what a speech-language pathologist can offer in the way of memory issues and mild cognitive impairment. Kathy, that probably bugs you a little bit that people are not knowledgeable and realize what you can do. I know what you can help them with. So watch at the end of the program, and you'll see Kathy's website and her blog. There is a wealth of information on those sites and more details. Kathy, tell us what we could do this week now.
Well,
send us on
I want to insert one other part. I think we've got a couple of minutes here. The other aspect with the mild cognitive impairment is activity engagement. And so what can happen is a person stops reading what they used to, or they can't do the puzzles at the level that they used to. And, it's use it or lose it. So the other thing is trying to develop a cognitive thinking brain game plan. And in one of our future programs, we're going to mention a program that's actually going to be established here locally in Hudson. And I'm creating some models in other areas, so that can be very, very helpful. But we need to know the person's story, what it is they like to do, and then try and modify those activities, because it also will decrease that depression and boredom. You feel like you're pretty sharp if you can't do those puzzles, but a lot of the products I've created are definitely along those lines. And it's about simplifying. So sometimes they can't read a novel anymore. Like one woman said, I can't, well, even a friend of mine that I just talked to recently, where the plot's changing all over the place. So I suggest, reading maybe Chicken Soup for the Soul Stories, or something along that line for the golfer or the gardener. And, it might be 3 or 4 pages, but then they are keeping those skills up. Reminiscence can be a fun thing to do, and getting old pictures. And that's one of the things that I find, if you have an early diagnosis, get your pictures out. You know that may change, but you can turn around and you can do some things. Okay, so let's end with a quote here.
I was going to say, we had so much to talk about today. Send us on our way with your quotes.
Okay. This is one I can truly identify with in working with my mom. This is what learning is. You understand something you've understood all your life, but in a new way. And that's by Doris Lessing.
Very good. Kathy, thank you so much for that excellent information. Thank you all for joining us. Join us next week. Now go and make it a great day.